Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome along to the racing years. And this year, it's 2016, which is the one we'll be looking back at. And over the next 90 minutes, some super guests coming your way from the flat world and indeed from the national hunt scene as well. But before we begin, let's remind ourselves of some of the finest moments of 2016 on Racing TV.
Heading down towards the last slide in the champion hurdle, and it's Annie Power comes towards it now. She's about 4 lengths clear. This year she jumped it perfectly. Annie Power heads up the hill. It's going to be third time lucky for her. The super sub Annie Power has won the Stan James champion hurdle.
Sprinter Sacre is over the final fence and clear. So is in second, back in third Special Tiara, followed then by God's Own, but it is Sprinter Sacre. They say they never come back. This is one of the great comebacks in the history of the Cheltenham Festival, as Sprinter Sacre is the champion again.
But here's the final fence now for Don Cossack. Comes towards it, measured it beautifully. Jacques is not going down without a fight, but Don Cossack is 4 lengths clear as they race on up the hill in the Tamico Cheltenham Gold Cup. And Don Cossack for Jigginstown and Gordon Elliott and Brian Cooper will win the Tamico Cheltenham Gold Cup of 2016.
And here's Rule the World on the outside, who's coming home strongest of all, and it's Rule the World, the horse who's never previously won a race over fences. He's going to win the biggest one of them all here, and it's Rule the World who wins the National for Mouse Morris, and a dream first ride for 19-year-old David Mullins.
Minding, despite being shuffled for last, is coming with a challenge and moves through into second. On the right-hand side, Architecture and Frankie Dettori. Minding the purple cap for Ryan Moore, moves through the lead. Minding hits the front in the Oaks. In second is Architecture, and Minding stamps her authority. Met trouble in running, but will follow up her 1,000 guineas success by winning the Oaks. US Army Ranger is now in full cry towards the outside. They enter the final furlong. Tarzan, US Army Ranger has got to the leader's girth, but has still got to get by. And Tarzan is putting out more. And it's Tarzan in the colours of the Arca card who has won the Investec Derby for Pat Smullen of Derwent Wells.
Postpone in front as they approach the final furlong. He's edging across towards the stands rail. Mutakev will need to switch by him. Highland Reel is rallying over on the far side. Postpone's going to have to dig really deep here. Mutakev, there's no room, or is there, up the inside? Postpone is digging deep. Postpone is going to hang on here and wins the jump on from Highland Reel.
Lightning Spear is staying on stoutly, but it's Minding who's moved to the lead in the QE2. Lightning Spear and Ribchester are trying to run her down, but it's Minding who still leads way over a length. Ribchester trying to close 7 Group 1s, and she's only 3. Minding won the QE Stakes, the G2 Stakes to beat Ribchester.
And now the 18th and final fence for Thistlecrack as he comes, tries to measure it. He's at it now. He's over safely and he is clear. And on his 4th run over fences, the novice Thistlecrack is going to win the King George. Thistlecrack is the champion of Brisbane.
A super year of action on the channel, some interesting news as well throughout 2016. And if you want to get any of your favourite memories from that year into the show at the end of today's programme, you can do so via studio@racingtv.com or @racingtv on Twitter. But the first thing we'll do is introduce our guest who'll navigate through the Jumps programme of 2016. It's fair to say for Ruby Walsh, who we'll say hello to now. Pretty good year, Ruby. Was it just the 24 Grade 1s and a 50th win at the Cheltenham Festival?
Yeah, I think it was, Nick, and I was looking at Rule the World winning the Grand National there, and I do believe I was at home here in Kildare watching that. I'd broken my wrist in Aintree, so yeah, it was a great year, but like every year as a jump jockey, it had its ups and downs.
Yes, it very much did. Are you well at the moment? I think you've been with me on this programme 2011, 2013, moving on into 2016. And I suppose when we talk about this, just to look at the names, York Hill, Duvan, Min, Annie Power, Vroom Vroom Mag, there were some absolute superstars to go back and look at.
Oh, there was. It was a golden generation of horses in Willie Mullins's, and I was lucky to be riding them. 2016, I was talking to Gillian about it last night, and she kind of threw her eyes to heaven and said, yeah, the last of the good years.
The last of the good years. I think there are some more to come. And just a bit further afield as well, towards the end of that year, I think you crossed stateside and won a big old race out there as well on Rawnack. It was the American Grand National.
Yeah, Jack Doyle unfortunately got injured, and I got a call up to ride Rawnack in Far Hills, which was an enjoyable trip. And I think Tingle, or the Undersaw, went to Tingle Creek later in that year as well.
He did indeed. We'll be talking about him at one of his 4 visits to Sandown, but we'll actually start with Sandown and the very beginning of the year, the first Grade 1 of the year, and it was won by York Hill. It was, of course, the Tolworth Hurdle. I think it was pretty disgusting weather on the day at Sandown, but there you are in the Wiley Silks, spattered in mud, but making the way through. And just for the context, Ruby, you'd beaten a certain Road to Respect in a maiden hurdle at Punchestown the time before in fine enough style. He turns up here a 4-9 shot in appalling enough weather. When you came out of this race, were you thinking Supreme or Neptune? Obviously, we know where he went, but what was your instinctive reaction?
I was thinking Neptune. We had, I suppose, a cluster of good novice hurdlers and Willies that season. And in my mind, I was trying to split them up where were they going to go, and I kind of thought York Hill would be the one that would get 2.5. So I was thinking we'd go that way anyway. He won the Tolworths, and he did what he always did, idled in front. It was one of his best performances going right-handed actually, whereas the older he got, the more he needed to go left. But he was very good that day, and he was brilliant when it came to Cheltenham.
Yeah, he was. We'll come on to that. Just with him in the early part of his career, of course, he was unbeaten, and he was rather a box-office novice hurdler. Did he always have that sort of natural exuberance that we saw later on in his career as well?
Oh, I think he did. Even when you go back, Nick, to his point-to-point days, I think he ran out to the left in a point-to-point on his first start, and then he went unbeaten. He was never that flashy. Even when Patrick Mullins won a bumper on him in Punchestown, he was going nowhere, and Patrick switched him out halfway down the back in Punchestown, and he took off, and all of a sudden he was in front, and then only scraped home. But I think that was a trait of his, to just scrape home. He always looked like he was going to deliver an awful lot more than he did.
So you talk about the left-handed thing. The first time he went left-handed under rules, that was in the Neptune. Yanworth was all the rage, of course, for Alan King and Barry Geraghty. You slipped up the inner on York Hill and went on and duly delivered. I mean, I think afterwards I read the quotes as well. We'll talk about the performance, but I think Willie Mullins said straight afterwards could be a champion hurdle horse. You said Arkle, of course, he went on to mixed trips as well. But on the day, how brilliant was he?
He was very good on the day, but he did get the run of the race. Things opened up down the hill, and he got a super run through off the bend, and he only did enough in front then to hold Yanworth off. I suppose I said Arkle because I was always of the mindset that novice races were easier to win in Cheltenham than championship races, and if you could keep the horses in the easiest races, it meant you had chances of riding winners. So that's why I thought Arkle, and Willie thought champion hurdle, but he ended up winning the JLT, so
yeah,
we'd settle for that.
Yes, just a bit. And he's obviously moved over to Britain now. I think he's a 10-year-old. But in terms of the early part of his career, how brightly did he burn? How much talent was there relative to some of the other novice hurdlers you would have ridden down the years?
You always felt there was an awful lot more under the bonnet than anybody was seeing. And when he won the JLT, I thought he could be a Gold Cup horse. He then went to Punchestown and was just, or Ferryhouse even, and was just touched off by Road to Respect again in a novice chase there. But the year after that didn't go according to plan for him, and he never really fulfilled his potential. But maybe the same could be said of Yanworth. I mean, when you looked at them that day in the Ballymore Novices Hurdle, you think they were going to achieve an awful lot more than they probably did. So I don't know if either fully lived up to what people hoped they might.
Interesting points on both of them, but we'll move on to one horse who was absolutely imperious this season and many other seasons as well, that being Douvan, who I think when winning the Arkle was taking it to 8 from 8 for Willie Mullins. He'd been busy in novice hurdles, of course won the Supreme, busy hammering future Gold Cup winner Sizing John in hurdles and over fences as well. Why so brilliant? What was it, or what is it about him, because he's still about now, but why so brilliant?
Just ability, Nick. That's about the long and the short of it. Unfortunately, he didn't have the soundness to maybe fulfill all the talent that he had, but he just had so much natural ability. He had so much speed, yet he stayed really well. He was a very good jumper. Alright, he fell in a champion chase, but any horse can fall. But he just had everything. He was the real package. He was dead straightforward. He had a great mentality. He had everything, but unfortunately, he just didn't have the physique to go with it to sustain a full career.
But interesting, I think when we talked about those top-class 2-mile chases will come to Sprinter Sacre, but I asked you a couple of shows ago about Azertiup, and you said masterminded as a 5-year-old. You could throw Corso Star in as a top-draw 2-mile chaser as well. His absolute peak, Douvan, where does he rank among the 2-mile chasers?
I don't think we ever had a horse in Willie Mullins that would work with him. Maybe Florida Pearl in his heyday, he was a very good workhorse as well, but you know, Douvan could have worked any day of the week with Hurricane Fly. He had more speed, he was very agile, hadn't have bags of scope. He wouldn't have been able to stand back from fences maybe as far as Sprinter Sacre could, but he was very, very quick when he got close to the takeoff board. He was very agile that way. He had everything. He could have been a superstar, but to be a superstar you have to put seasons back to back, and unfortunately Douvan couldn't do that.
We'll talk about Annie Power. This was the champion hurdle. Now, the story obviously going into it was the fact that there was no Faheen in the race. He'd been ruled out a month or so before. She'd only just returned, hadn't she? She'd got off 20-1 on or something like at Punchestown, but then she was fast-tracked into this. She was supplemented for the race as well. But I suppose to put into context the fact she'd been beaten in a world hurdle, we know what happened in the Mares Hurdle the year before as we see her ping the last this day. It was an incredibly emotional success in more than one way, wasn't it?
Well, it was. I mean, she was a brilliant race mare who'd been to Cheltenham twice. She was second to more of that in the Stairs Hurdle. She'd fallen in the Mares Hurdle, and you know, how many chances do horses get to deliver on the biggest stage? And she was supplemented in, as you said, when Faheen got injured. You know, and you're supplementing in at sort of a good chunk of money. You're putting your neck on the line, and you know, both Willie and I felt she should go in. Rich and Susanna agreed, and she was supplemented, and she got to deliver. And I just felt it was justification for her that she got to show everyone how good she was and how good we thought she was.
When you reflect on her, is there an extra set of affection for her because as you said, she didn't have the win prior, the fact that she's still plucky enough to go and win a champion hurdle after a couple of starts at the Cheltenham Festival where it hadn't gone her way? We're just seeing you punch in the air. Do you reflect on her with extra affection?
I do, but I was lucky enough. I have horses for Willie during the summer, and she would always be here in the field beside the house. So he'd be having a barbecue in the summer, Nick, and he'd be looking at Vroom Vroom Mag, looking in over the railing at you. So I don't know, maybe I don't know what makes the heart go fonder, but she was always around, and she was just an exceptionally good mare. And she wasn't quick, but she had a huge cruising speed, and she could sustain it for a very long time. And you know, that champion hurdle, there was a lot of stayers in it, but she was able to go a gallop that had all the stayers beaten at the second hurdle. There was only 3 or 4 horses on the bridle: My 10 to Yours, the new one, and Nicholas Canyon. Everything else was struggling after jumping 2 hurdles behind her.
Well, Nicholas Canyon went, of course, to win the Stayers Hurdle next year. She had a magical winning record. We'll see her last performance, what it turned out to be as well, at Aintree a few weeks later. That was obviously in the Aintree Hurdle. She was retired, I think, a year or so later. And I suppose the legacy continues. She had a couple of foals, one by Camelot, one by Galileo, so things to look forward to longer term.
I think she has 2 Galileos. I think the Camelot, unfortunately, I think she slipped the Camelot. Right. But the 2 Galileos, I think she's 2 Galileos on the ground. But like even that day in Aintree, when she got up to what was probably her best trip, 2.5 miles, she absolutely routed 2 very good horses that had been second and third during the champion hurdle. And you know, I was lucky enough to ride some very good mares: Quiviga, Vroom Vroom Mag, Benny the Jew, Feathered Lady. But this mare was just that bit different. She
was. I suppose actually in that race, didn't you ride Asian Maze as well, to absolutely blitz them a few years before that?
I did, and you know, she actually fell in the champion hurdle, Asian Maze, and she was a really talented mare too. But look, it's hard to say what the best horse you rode, but the best mare I rode was definitely Annie Power.
We'll look at another mare that year. That was Vroom Vroom Mag in the OLBG Mares Hurdle. Another winner for Willie Mullins and yourself in that race, of course, with the Quevega years in the past at this point. I saw the quote from you afterwards, and you said because she was such a good jumper, there just probably aren't enough hurdles in a race to even suit her.
Yeah, well, look, she had been chasing. When she came, her first run for Willie was in a beginner's chase in Wexford, and I guess when Annie got moved up to the champion hurdle or was supplemented in, it left the door open for Vroom Vroom Mag in the Mares Hurdle, and she slotted in there very nicely. But she was a brilliant jumper, and obviously in a hurdle race there's less jumps than a chase, but look, she was a very, very good mare, and she was just superior to this bunch of horses. Obviously, when she went back there in 2017, she got chinned by Apple's Jade, but that year she was easily the best horse in the race, or mare in the race even.
So on the first day, 2016, we've seen you on we'll talk about Min later, but we've seen you on Duvan, we've seen you on Annie Powell, we've seen you in Bream Bream Mag, 3 top-level wins at the very beginning of the week. And when you'd year on year evaluate or preview in your head what you were going into at the Cheltenham Festival, would you always go in with a fairly level head with it, or would there be some years that would ultimately be different to others just because of the quality of the squad?
I always judged it by favourites, Nick. I think the more favourites you could ride, the more chances you had of riding winners. And some people would say, oh, what about the pressure of riding favourites? To me, you couldn't be riding enough of them. The more favourites you rode, the better the book of rides you had. And there was different years you went. Obviously, in 2014, I had 4 incredible rides the first day. 3 of them won, Annie Power fell. You know, and that year, those 3 on paper before racing started that day had exceptional chances.
Didn't they just? We will come back to Ruby in due course, but it's time to introduce on the phone Nicky Henderson, who's kindly on hand for us to talk about a couple of his superstars in 2016, and there were some exceptional horses. But Nicky, first up, how are you and how are things over in Lambourne?
Good, Nick, thank you very much. No, everything is sort of quite quiet in Lambourne, I'm afraid. I mean, on the jumping front, we're sort of virtually wound down and just waiting for a bit of grass to grow, and they'll turn them out. And the flat boys are obviously desperate to get going, and let's hope they can in the near future. But say from our point of view, it's very, very quiet here. It's either a bit of riding out or a bit of paintbrushing, I'm afraid.
Yeah, well, congratulations from us at Racing TV on another championship. It's just sort of strange and surreal circumstances to win it, Nicky.
It was really. It was a pity it didn't go on, and we missed. Missing Aintree was sad in a lot of respects. It's a great meeting, and we love that. It's a sort of big away day, sort of 3 days away up there. It's great fun. I actually rather sort of hope we had a few chances in it this year, but according to the virtual racing the other day, we had no chance whatsoever. Even got one to refuse.
There were some extraordinary rides and some extraordinary jumping in that race as well. I was intrigued to watch that back recently. But we'll talk about the 2016 Cheltenham Festival, and that will be remembered largely for one thing, and one thing that was very special. That was Sprinter Sacre winning his 2nd Queen Mother Champion chase. You yourself and everyone saw him in 2013 when he was invincible. He was just about for a couple of seasons. And to go through what he did, I know we've talked about it plenty, but to reminisce, to go through what he did, but to come back as champions do and win another Queen Mother Champion chase, does it get more emotional, more special as time passes?
But it certainly never goes away. That sort of, the memory of the day is sort of very vivid, and it just was something quite unique. He was unique. As you say, in his early days, he was virtually unbeatable. Nobody was in his arc or in his first champion chase. Nothing was going to get near him in those days. And I remember Ruby saying he went up to, we were going to the ditch once, going up the back of the hill, and Sprinter took off a length behind him, or half a length down. I think he was on Politolo. No, not Politolo, I can't remember, Grey Horse. And he said this great big thing just passed him in the air, and you couldn't believe what he could do. He was sensational in those days. And then we had 2 years in real low days. They were desperate, to the point where most people, I think, thought we were crackers to even try and go on. But he had his problems, and he had this fibrillating heart, and it just took all the confidence out of him, and his sort of usual spring in his step. But gradually it crept back into the vocabulary, and I say with each little sign that things were getting better, we were sort of more and more determined to go on.
It was, wasn't it? Because he'd won the Schlur in November, and of course people couldn't quite believe it. He went and won the Desert Orchid, and then all roads led to Cheltenham thereafter. But for the great days, the emotional days that you would have had on not just Cheltenham but on a racecourse, where does that one stack up?
Oh, I think it has to be the best. Yes, I think without a doubt. We've been very, very lucky over quite a lot of years, 40-something. And that to be fair, that comeback day, the day we're coming to, was without a doubt the most special day that I can remember. Yeah.
He did race once more, which would be the last race of his career, of course. That was at Sandown in the Celebration Chase. And by this point, after the Queen Mother Champion Chase, the levels he reached at 2013 were something altogether different. But for his last race, by this point, beating good horses, the looks, the demeanour, the swagger, the full package, was it all back in near enough full working order, Nicky?
I think he was. I think he was actually a better horse even at Sandown than he was at Cheltenham. He really did just completely dominate that Celebration Chase that year. Sadly, it was to be his last race, as we hit upon another problem at the beginning of the next season, a tendon injury which necessitated retirement. To be honest, he was never going to have another year off and come back again at the age he was going to be. And I think that day at Sandown, sadly we didn't know it was going to be his last race, but he was spectacular then. And by that time, they already had, the crowds were just incredible, and the atmosphere they built for him was just totally unique. I think the other big day I'll never forget with him was when we actually took him to Punchestown. I'd always promised we'd take him to Ireland one day. Richie Galway was the manager there, and actually we went from Cheltenham to Aintree to Punchestown, and he won all three, which takes a Sprinter Sacre to do that. And Ireland just gave him a welcome that I don't think even Ireland had seen before. It was very memorable, but there was no doubt this day, his second champion chase, his comeback champion chase, was the most special day, and the scenes, the crowds, I will never ever forget now.
Well, and because it was in 2016 at the November meeting that you announced that press conference, I think on the Sunday, you brought him to Cheltenham to say goodbye and have his lap of honour. I think there was a quote, you joked and you said, the bad news is I'm not retiring, but the sad news is Sprinter Sacre is, and he got to that public affection point by then, hadn't he?
He had, he had, and it was lovely. He was there this year parading before the champion chase, which sadly we couldn't contend with old Altior, who's now in his trying to fill his shoes. But he was parading, and he looked absolutely wonderful, and he walked round the paddock as always, as if he owned it. The only thing that disappointed him was that he wasn't allowed out onto the course to go and do what he did best, which was just go and gallop and jump.
And it was just a significant meeting, not just for that comeback for Sprinter Sacre, but the very first race, the performance of Altior, which brought about a new star, as you said. He's looking to fill the shoes, and what he's done over a number of years since is staggering in itself. And I think it was your first Supreme since Flown back in the early 1990s. Bouvardere was in third, Min was in second. It was a Supreme of Supremes, really, Nicky, wasn't it?
It was, and to be honest with you, I've never been so confident about a horse. Bouvardere was a nice young horse coming along. He proved to be a bit more than that. So did Min. But to be honest with you, Altior at any stage when he was, and especially then and in his Arkle and even in his champion chase, that he was. I don't get confident very often, but Altior in that Supreme, it would have needed some awful disaster to have got him beaten. He was so good. He's a very, very talented horse. Interestingly, actually, Sprinter Sacre was third in the Supreme novice hurdle, ridden by one AP. We told me he needed a wind operation, which we duly had done straight away. And that was obviously his last hurdle race before he went chasing. And AP was quite right. But he was third in the Supreme, and rather like Bouvardere was. But I don't think anything would have beaten Altior that day. He was, and thankfully still is, a very, very talented horse.
Yes, he is. And just as we see the walk back with the jockey aboard, Nico de Boinville, you're just greeting him back. He'd won the Gold Cup on Coney Green the year before. How big a meeting was this for Nico?
Well, it had been, obviously, with Sprinter having ridden him before. Interestingly, before before anybody knew of Nico, he was actually riding Sprinter every day, and in all his work, and then Barry'd come over and school him and have the pleasure of going around Cheltenham's and all those lovely places, and I mean, Barry rode him absolutely beautifully, but Nico rode him every single day at home, and again, that would be quite a pleasure in itself, but he did a great job with the horse, and then Nico's career started to take off, and then when Barry retired, Barry didn't retire at all. He joined when AP retired. Barry joined forces with JP, and although Barry kept riding a lot of horses for us, there was obviously not going to be. We weren't going to switch one to the other, and in fact, in the first race Sprinter ran in that year, Barry had to ride a horse of JP's, and I had no hesitation, and nor did Pat Pugh, on putting Nico in what must have been a pretty hot seat. And he carried it off brilliantly. They got on well together. They got on beautifully together. And I say, Nico had already won a Gold Cup by then anyway, so it wasn't surprising that, this was, the other Gold Cup was after Sprinter's first innings, as you might call it. But no, I think it was the sort of horse that put Nico on right at the top, proving that he was not just a good jockey on the big day that could, knew exactly where he was going to go, and nothing was too. The occasion never got to him. He's got a great nerve.
Indeed. Lovely memories of 2016. Nicky, thank you very much. Congratulations on the championship. Stay safe and well, and hopefully we'll speak soon.
Thank you, and to you all.
Nicky Henderson reflecting on the 2016 Cheltenham Festival, Sprinter Sacre's comeback, of course, running his second Queen Mother Champion chase and the emergence of Altior. We'll be talking about that Supreme in a moment. But Ruby Walsh, who's rejoined just after Nicky was on the line there, just interesting to listen to his thoughts there. And just with Sprinter Sacre and that comeback, because we were on 2013 and that was when Sprinter Sacre was at his brilliant best and was pretty much untouchable. But generally speaking, after what he went through, the laws of averages suggest that they just don't come back, do they? It made it all the more incredible that he did what he did.
No, but that's the skill of a trainer, Nick. That's why training is a skill and not a science. It's an art. So you can, even listening to Nicky there, you can imagine him watching Sprinter Sacre at home, organising a bit of work so Sprinter Sacre could win the work to get a bit of confidence, jumping lower jumps. You could see the whole mythology behind what he's saying, and I'd say it must have given Nicky himself huge satisfaction to do what he did and get the horse back to where he got him to.
Should we talk about that Supreme Novices Hurdle? Because, of course, you were on Min and those colours. We'd had Champagne Fever in 13, Vitor in 14, Duvan in 15. Min was obviously fancied to go and make it a four-timer in a row for the same set of connections. But history tells us what an incredible Supreme that was.
Yeah, look, I think Charbel was even fourth, who turned out to be a very good horse as well, but I don't think we were that far out and really fancying Min. We just ran into Altior. And unfortunately for Min, he was going to run into Altior a few more times and come off second best on each occasion, but Altior was a very good horse. I actually couldn't believe when I saw him winning a maiden hurl in Chepstow in October, which is exceptionally early for one of Nicky Henderson's, that he would end up being his best novice, that he was out that early. But he's obviously a very easy horse to get fit or to train, because Nicky's tend not to really appear till almost a Hennessy meeting. So Altior is just an exceptional racehorse.
Isn't he just? Just confirm that Supreme Novices Hurdle, Altior first, and of course he's gone on to win many Grade 1s, 9 Grade 1s and all, Min 6 Grade 1s and counting, Bouvidere 7 as well. That was the first three, and then honourable mentions, as you said, for the likes of Charbel, Super Sunday, Petit Mouchoir, of course, all in there as well. We'll go further with the festival and move on to the Thursday. And a landmark success for you, Black Hercules in the JLT Novices Chase. I think there was talk of him going for the 4-miler before this, but in the end it was over a lot shorter. But just in terms of your personal achievement, you said, when I joined Pat Taff on 25 winners, that was unbelievable, but 50 is incredible.
It was, and it's not something I don't think I could ever have dreamed of doing. It just happened, and I ended up working for two trainers who trained a lot of winners at Cheltenham, and that was obviously a huge help. But Black Hercules on the day was very tough. Obviously Lamy Serge, I think it was Lamy Serge, and he had jumped across in front of him at the second last, and he had to come back around and battle hard to win. But he was a tough horse. I think people had him down as a 4-mile horse because he'd won the 3-mile chase in Warwick.
Yeah.
But when he went back to Navan to run in the 10 up, he raced quite keenly, and I think that day Willie decided we should be going back in trip with him, not up in trip.
Now, also on the day, the sadly ill-fated later that year Vautour, we saw his brilliance once again. I suppose the story was the fact that he went for the Ryanair 2 days before. We'd all thought he was going to go for the Gold Cup, but obviously the decision was made to go there. He won his 3rd Cheltenham Festival race. It wouldn't have pleased too many people, or a few people would have been a bit displeased with that ultimately. But I noticed you'd said afterwards that you'd ridden him out that morning at Cheltenham and he just felt like a totally different horse because he hadn't been pleasing the team prior to that.
No, when I left Willie Mullins on the Saturday prior to Cheltenham to go, I had thought in my head I'd be riding Val Sarlido in this race, who finished second. Brian Cooper was going to ride the other Jigginstown horse, so I was going to ride Val Sarlido and Jack Adam in the Gold Cup. I didn't even think Vautour was coming to Cheltenham. David Casey rode him Sunday morning and thought he was a bit better. He stayed at home and rode him work on the Monday morning, and he worked a little better. Now, he didn't work well or anything, he just worked a little better. So Willie decided to bring him. I stuck with him in the Ryanair, and I'm glad I did, and he bolted in. But he beat the same horses, Nick, that he'd beaten the previous year in the JLT. He didn't beat them as easy. He won because of the talent that he was, but for whatever reason at that time he just wasn't going as well as he could have been.
As a jumper, as a natural jumper, particularly around Cheltenham, we saw in the Ryanair and particularly the year before in the JLT, how impeccable a jumper was he generally? What was it about his jumping that was so special?
He was very clean and he had a lot of scope, but he did go and fall on his next start in entry. At the first fence down the back, he overjumped and dribbled out in his head and rolled over. He had terrific power, like Sprinter Sacre had huge power. He could stand way back from a fence. He was also nimble enough to get in. He was a very good jumper. It was just unfortunate that he tipped up an entry in his next start.
We had a moment of history as well on the day, another moment of history. That was in the Dawn Run Mares Novices Hurdle, the first running of it, and it was won by Limini. Now, for a brand new race and all the talent that we've talked about that you had in the 2016 Cheltenham Festival, was this the banker of the week?
We thought she was. She appreciated a bit better ground. She'd won the Solarina Novice Hurdle and testing ground. Her race Honeysuckle won this year. Her race Lorena had won the year before. Honeysuckle didn't win it this year, sorry. She won it last year, obviously, as a novice. But Limini, yeah, she was doing incredible work. She was working with Vroom Vroom Mag. Yeah, she was running a novice hurdle. We thought it was probably the weakest race, and this mare was going the best, and she absolutely sluiced up.
She did indeed, at a moment of history, and it's been dominated by Willie Mullins ever since, as she dotted up in the sunshine on the Thursday of the Cheltenham Festival. We'll talk about another race that day. I don't think he rode in the race, but that was Thistlecrack winning the World Hurdle. He was just perfect that year, wasn't he? All the way from Newbury to the Long Walk, the Cleve, and then I think Tom Scudamore exuded absolute maximum confidence. And when this horse was right at this point, of course he went on to win the King George later this year, he was an absolute superstar.
Oh, he was an exceptionally talented horse. I was lucky enough to ride him one day in Ascot when he won a novice hurdle, but he was a very talented horse. He won this race. He's mouthed open, really, didn't he? He absolutely bolted up, and the world did look at his feet that day, and you were thinking, would they stay hurdling? Would they go chasing? They chose to go chasing. He won the King George as a novice. Like, I don't know how far he won. He won a long way, and he had beat Q Card and a few others, but he was a really, really good racehorse. And you know, you go to Cheltenham thinking some years different horses are bankers. We all thought Paisley Park was this year. Unfortunately, he didn't deliver, but Thistlecrack looked at going that year, and he did deliver.
Now, we'll talk about the Gold Cup. Of course, Jack Adam, one of his many fine efforts, was just in behind Don Cossack on the day. There was a very key incident, a few from home, and that was the fall of Q Card, the £1 million fall after he'd won, of course, the King George prior to that, the Betfair Chase. We'll pick it up at this point. Just going into this race, as we see Q Card come down, who did you think was the one to beat?
Yeah, I didn't think anything would beat Jack Adam. I thought he was working that well. I thought I was the one to beat. But no, I didn't. I had a lot of confidence in him. He'd been second to Cooney the year before, but Don Cossack, I kind of knew my fate before we turned in, Nick. Don Cossack was going that easy under Brian Cooper, and to be fair to Jack Adam, he kept going all the way to the line, but he just didn't have the class of Don Cossack. Would Q Card have won or not? No one will ever know, but the fact that he never won a Gold Cup after, or threatened to win a Gold Cup after, would make you wonder, was 3 1/4 a little bit far for him? But on the day, Don Cossack was very good, and Gordon Elliott and Brian Cooper had a huge day out of him.
And to reflect on Jack Adam, as we see him valiantly finishing second to Don Cossack, who never raced again, of course, the winner of the Gold Cup that year. How do we reflect on Jack Adam with those? Well, there were many, many good efforts in the Gold Cup, weren't there?
There was. He ran behind Size and John the following year. He did. He just, I don't know why he didn't win a Gold Cup. I thought at the back of the last in 2015 he was going to beat Coney Gree. I thought for a long way in 2016 he was going to win, but he didn't. He just always seemed to find one too good. But he was a very good horse, Jack Adam, but just not quite a Gold Cup horse. Just
kept bumping into one or other. We'll pick up with Ruby again in a few moments' time. But before that, someone who had a good festival that year is on the line, Sam Twiston-Davies. Thank you very much for joining us. How are things with you at the moment, Sam?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you very much. And yourself?
Yeah, really well. Obviously, it's a frustrating time on the jumps front with the delay till July. But just to reflect on the season that you've had, it was 99 not out ultimately in terms of the amount of winners, because we were robbed of going forward with jump racing when you no doubt would have cleared a century and gone well beyond that. But in terms of the races you won, the Ascot Chase, the King George notably, the Charlie Hall, were you happy with last season?
Yeah, I was incredibly lucky that obviously Dad's team performed very well all year, and then came in for the ride on Llanderzobo, which was a very special day. And then obviously we had a lot of support from Carl Hinchy and Mark Scott, and a lot of big owners like them make a massive difference to one season and one's yard. So we've obviously got the Options O Syndicate at home, and then obviously Simon and Isaac as well. So we're very lucky, and as a team we get a lot of good support now. So hopefully going forward there's plenty more to look forward to too.
How are you passing the time with this obviously enforced absence of racing, Sam?
Quite lucky in that obviously my Nicola Clements, she's obviously in at Osborne's plenty, so I've been going in with her, which is good because keeps your mind sharp, and obviously sitting on different variations of 2-year-olds and stuff, which is quite good fun. So not that I'd ever really be much of a flat jockey, but it's been quite fun sitting on a few of the sharper 2-year-olds, that's for sure.
The 2016 Cheltenham Festival threw you a good few winners. We'll have a look at the Wednesday when it was a really good end to the day, 2 wins in succession. Diego de Charmille and then Fred Winter. It was a 1-2 for Paul Nicholls. I think Ramanda Sanam was second, nearly caught you. Ruby might have had a say in it in the Wiley colours. He was on Voix de Rêve, who came down at the last. He certainly would have had a say in it. But he was quite a buzz horse, Diego de Charmille, for this day, because this was his British debut, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was incredibly lucky, and when I was kind of riding for Paul, he was a master of picking up these French horses and then placing them in the races at Cheltenham. So obviously Fred Winter was obviously Diego's target, and then Petit Son year before then was also one. So he's very good at kind of targeting these races and then going off and doing very well with them.
And then to go on and do what he did 40 minutes later, winning the champion bumper. I think Ballyandy was taking it to 4 from 5. I think your dad said after the race, he said, we got knocked so far back, I thought we were beaten, but it shows what a good horse Ballyandy was on that day.
Yeah, it was a very special day. That we were gutted he got beat at Ascot. Really thought he'd have won that day. But there you go, it's racing, these things happen, so I was hoping for a kind of a nice smooth passage round and champion bumper, but how easy that is to happen is something that you need a good bit of luck for, but shows the class of the horse, and then obviously what he's doing now is just testament to obviously Dad, that he's still capable of turning up on the big days and doing as well as he is.
That's the thing, 4 years on, and he's still only 9, and you won the Champion Hurdle Trial in that dramatic finish at Haydock back in January, and of course we saw him in the Champion Hurdle most recently as well, so a bit of testament to the horse that he's still going strong now.
Yeah, and placing an international, and just testament to the yard really, keeping him in good shape, good heart, and amazing to think at the start of the season we were running him over 3, thinking obviously a lot of Champion Bumper winners want a trip, so thought 3 miles was probably where we were going wrong, and ended up going back the totally opposite way, back to 2, and he's been as good as ever.
Just summarise for us, obviously you were riding for Paul Nicholls, but this day you were riding for your father Nigel. You'd won the Neptune 3 years earlier on the new, won a Grade 1 at the Festival for the family, but to have a Grade 1 family success, what does that mean to you?
Oh yeah, it's very special. It's obviously very different because when you're with Paul and you have the team of owners, they have operating. To say it's expected is probably wrong, but it's expected of you to kind of turn up at the big days, perform, and to sit on these horses and get it right. So and then when you're doing it for Dad, and obviously a little bit different type of budget, so when it does go right and you win a Grade 1 champion bumper, I mean, it's just incredibly special.
You weren't done for the Cheltenham Festival. In fact, I think it was the very last race of the meeting. A huge price shot, 28-1. Solar Impulse winning the Nicky Henderson Grand Annual. But how key were the blinkers? They were a last-minute decision, weren't they, to be put on?
Yeah, obviously made a big difference. Ruby'd actually sat on him in the race at the Lightning Novice Chase. I think he might be the one to suggest it might help him. It's quite an idle horse, so it went well, but it's kind of that race is a funny race because when you go out relaxed, you're able to ride a different way to you might be if you hadn't had a good festival. So went out very relaxed, and we'd already had a good week. There was no pressure. I think Mr. Wiley, it's a funny story actually. Paul and Mr. Wiley said, look, if we don't see it afterwards, we're going to try and miss the traffic, and ended up winning, and yeah, it's become a very special day. It
suddenly becomes quite a good evening. I think Ruby's still on the line there. Did you point the team in the way of blinkers for Solar Impulse, Ruby?
Yeah, I'd gone too soon. I'm in Doncaster, so I had to come up with some excuse for the ride I'd given him, so I said maybe blinkers would suit him. And
just quickly, with Wada Rev, we saw Sam winning the Fred Winter there. Would you have had him covered that day?
I actually think the grey horse, the fella on the outside, Campiador, was going a little bit better than the rest of us. That's what I thought at the time, but maybe Wada Rev would have won, but if they don't jump around, you don't win.
Absolutely right. We'll be talking more to Ruby in a moment or two's time, but we'll carry on with Sam in 2016. Now, there was another success, very, very valuable and certainly one to look back on for your father, Nigel. That was the RSA Chase success of Black Lion. You were on Le Mercure that day, Sam, but just knowing what we know now, retrospectively, given the injury peril that Ryan Hatch has suffered, he no longer, of course, rides in races, no longer a jockey, owing to the injuries. How special a day is this to look back on?
Oh, it's like the day in itself was just incredibly special because obviously with Ryan being part of what was brilliant is that when I kind of went to Paul's, Ryan filled into Dad's, and literally every big day turned up, did the job exceptionally.
Yeah.
If you can hear any clicking in the background, I must apologise. I'm actually currently playing Xbox with him. So you asked how I was killing me time. Some of it.
Love it. Which game?
Sure, as it's seen. We're on Call of Duty. I can hear them. I've had to take my headset off, and I can hear them abusing me because we got down to the last 5 in the last game, and then I hid in the hedge, and then they all died, and I was just led in the hedge. So they're not happy.
I didn't expect that to come out in the conversation when we reflected on Black Lion's success in the RSA Chase. And Ryan, at the moment, he's working with your brother, isn't he?
Yeah, Willie and Ryan have obviously teamed up, do a fantastic job with a lot of Carl Hinchy's and Mark Scott's young horses, and very lucky in that they kind of suggested that they thought Riders on the Storm and a few of those others might suit our system well. So that's kind of how they ended up with Dad, and obviously they're operating out of Fergal O'Brien's old yard at my mum's. So very lucky in that it's always going smoothly, and they've actually got more horses in than Dad at the minute. They've still got, I think, 14 in, and Dad's actually down to 5, I think.
I don't want to keep you away from Call of Duty for too long, so we'll reflect on Vicente winning the first of 2 Scottish Grand Nationals for you. He went on to win another one, but this was an incredible day, and it swayed the Trainers' Championship back towards Paul Nicholls, didn't it? Because it was him and Willie Mullins coming into the last few weeks of the season. A 4-timer on the day, the headline act being Vicente.
Yeah, and the day before was a hard one, or was it that day as well? Or it might have been the next year. Zubair got chinned at the Scottish Championship. The form wasn't all that well, but yeah, it was a very good day. Vicente was a horse that obviously wouldn't have been everyone's favourite because he wasn't the best of jumpers, but when you've got a horse like him that's capable of putting up those performances time and time again, he's one that will always live very fondly in memory for me anyway.
You always seem quite magnanimous and smiling even in defeat sometimes, take it on the chin. Are you the same way when you're playing video games, Sam?
Not too bad, and trust me, if you had this conversation with my dad, he wouldn't sound a good loser, so always trying to achieve more or do better or try and make less mistakes, but I guess it's life for the jockey. Everyone wants to make less mistakes than they make it, but if it was easy then it would all be rich and off somewhere else.
Of course it is. Sam, enjoy Call of Duty along with Ryan, and thank you very much for coming on.
No, thank you very much, and I hope you're all well and stay healthy, and hopefully you'll see you all soon.
Here, you too.
Thank you very much. Cheers. Bye.
Did ask him, Ruby, what was the life of a jockey like for, well, certainly for Sam, while he's obviously not doing the day job, and he's obviously spending it in good company playing a few video games.
Yeah, making most of his time, learning something new, advancing his craft for life, playing video games.
Yeah, right. Let's move on to the Irish Grand National of that year. Tricky viewing, of course, for yourself. You crept into it aboard Bless the Wings, who was in second, but it was the first of a massive double for Mouse Morris in Nationals within the space of a few weeks. This was Rogue Angel, and no one would have begrudged Mouse this day, would he?
I don't think so, not even me. Obviously, Mouse and Shani had lost, and Jamie had lost Tiffer, their brother and son, the previous summer. So, no, I don't think anyone would begrudge them this success. And look, I thought I delivered Bless the Wings at the right time. I probably delivered them 50 yards too soon, really. But Rogue Angel battled back and beat me, and C'est la vie. But it was a big day for Ger Fox, but it was a better day for Mouse Morris. He'd won the race in the late 70s as a jockey, and this was a very poignant success for him.
We'll talk about another of his successes in a moment. Just with Bless the Wings, were you just cautious to get him in and not go for him too soon because you'd wonder how much he'd find or not?
Yeah, I'd never ridden him, obviously. Willie had no runner in the race, so I ended up riding one of Gordon's, and the instructions were trying to put him in front as late as you can. I produced him at the last, he jumped to the front, actually got a bump in the air, and I think that knocked a bit of momentum out of him, and Rogue Angel battled back to beat him. But obviously the Irish National was run before the English National that year, because I got hurt in the injury, so I don't know how I rode in Fairyhouse.
I think it was about 10 or 11 days before the English National, which was won by Rule the World. And when you look back at his career, we'll see the performance with David Mullins, 19-year-old, riding Rule the World to victory in his first ride in a Grand National. The horse's career figures as a chaser of 15 runs, 1 win. If you're going to only win once, you might as well make it the biggest one of the lot. Definitely.
What a race to break your maiden in, and he was very lucky the third last, and David Mullins did a great job to stay on him. Obviously, Vic Canvas was on the inside, the Last Samurai on the outside, and David Mullins produced him off the elbow to swoosh by and beat them all. It was a brilliant piece of riding. You watch it back, I was watching him on the replays the other night and where he was all the way. It was a great ride. It was a very tough, genuine horse.
That's the thing, for all that he hadn't won another race, he had been running up against the best novice chasers, certainly the previous season, just about the best novice chasers there were. And when we did the 2013 show, he was second to the new one in the Neptune. There was quite a bit of back class there, wasn't there?
There was. I think he'd run well in a world hurdle at some stage as well. The ability was always there, but just I suppose he was a high-class handicapper when all was said and done, Nick, but there's not that many high-class handicaps, and he ended up running in graded races where he was just falling short. So, look, he got his day, and he got the biggest day of all.
Also at Aintree, in terms of the jaw-dropping moment, that would have been Apple's Jade winning the 4-year-old hurdle, which turned out to be the first of 11 Grade 1s in her career. Of course, checked out for her career recently to go and pursue a next port of call as a broodmare, but she was absolutely devastating this day, reversing the triumph form with Ivanovic Gorbatov. Of course, she came down on footpad, but she would have taken the field into the red zone this day, wouldn't she? She was, of course, at Willie Mullins's at this stage.
She was, and they had gone a really good gallop. I remember footpad. I was a long way back on footpad, and I actually thought going to the fourth last where he fell that I was starting to sneak into the race. Now, obviously, I would never have won, but he might have been a good second. But on this occasion, this mare was just outstanding. But she did that a few times in her career. There was a couple of days in Fairyhouse where she put horses to the sword, like so far out, and just kept up a relentless gallop. That, you know, there was days when Apple's Jade was simply unbeatable, and this was one of them. And a couple of times in the Hatton's Grace hurdle, she did the same thing.
We're going to sign off for chatting about the 2016 Jumps year by going right to the end of it, beginning of December, and your fourth and final win in the Tingle Creek. And you won it on some superstar horses before, and another one in Undersow, who, I mean, I was looking at his career record when he came to Sandown. He was never worse than second, but he was never really worse than second in any race, was there? This was when he beat Cider Grugy and Co in the Tingle Creek, but How much did you love riding Sandown, those 2 mile quick horses? I think of the likes of Twist Magic, where you led them a merry dance. How much of a special track and trip was it to you?
I think to ride in Tingle Creek, 2 miles round Sandown, it's a huge thrill riding a fancied one. I'm not sure the lads at the back who are on the also rans find it that thrilling, but when you're on one that's going forward and jumping, there is no better feeling in jump racing. I was lucky enough to ride, as you said, won it 4 times, Call Out, Twist Magic, Undersaw. It was brilliant, and Undersaw that day was spectacular. The rain came, the ground was soft, he out battled Sire de Grugy after missing the last, and he was brilliant that day.
When we evaluate 2016 as a whole, as I mentioned right at the start, 24 Grade 1 winners, an American National as well. What was your moment of that year?
Annie Power in the Champion Hurdle.
Easy one.
Dead simple.
Absolutely perfect.
Wish all questions you asked me were so straightforward.
That's every time, Ruby, and I'm sure hopefully as we go through 2017 and beyond we might well be back on again. But thank you very much indeed for joining us, and go and enjoy the rest of the day.
Cheers, Nick.
Top man to Ruby, and thank you very much to Ruby Walsh. Also for the jumps part of things, Sam Twiston-Davies and Nicky Henderson. When you rejoin us after this short break, we'll be turning our attentions to the flat.
The Emerald Isle. Racing is so much more. These guys are braver than me. A mid-weekend in the Wild West. The race that stops the nation. Head to racingbreak.com to find out more.
Here is a Racing TV Travel Club offer in partnership with Racing Breaks, and it's for the Cheltenham Festival in 2021. It's to book an overnight package for the 2021 festival for just a £25 deposit and get £25 off your first booking with code RTV25. And to find out a bit more, visit racingtv.com/travel club.
At Racing TV, 100% of our profits go back into racing. Thank you for supporting the sport that we all know and love.
Time to switch to the flat and the year that was 2016, and to guide us through it, delighted to say that the second part of the show, Chris Dixon will be on hand. Chris, how are you?
Yeah, all good, thanks, Nick. Quiet time of things, isn't it? Could do with a haircut, but yeah, keeping well, most importantly. Are you okay?
Yeah, not too bad. Is that the new home office that I know that you've been building recently?
It is, yeah. Former garage.
Good man. In terms of 2016, when you were asked to come through and talk about this, I mean, it was a year in the miling division. You had the clashes between the likes of the Gurkha, Galileo Gold, who we'll be hearing about from in a minute, and Ortard, etc. I think my defining memory, we'll be talking about her in a moment, is Minding and the domination of so many races from her. She was brilliant that year, wasn't she?
She was, exactly. There were a few little things that took you through that particular year, I suppose. One or two themes that ran through the season. You mentioned that there was the milers amongst the 3-year-olds. That was certainly one of the themes that ran right through the season, and a really interesting one. But it was probably, in summary, the year of the French and the fillies, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I think France had the outstanding flat horse of the year, and the fillies really did light up that particular season with both Minding and Found, of course.
Found, who we'll be talking about later. So too with the French horse you mentioned there, Al Manzour, who won a couple of top-level races towards the end of the year and was the best horse around. But let's have a look back at Minding and the year that started off in the Guineas and went all the way through to the QE2. She was brilliant.
jet setting. Alice springs towards the left-hand side, coming to stake a claim. Turret rocks. Ballydoyle trying to side through the field, finds his path blocked as Minding commits and goes for home and takes 2 lengths out of the field. Alice springs in second. Ballydoyle's had a troubled passage, but he's now trying to stay on with midweek. Uphill for home and out in front. Minding continues this break with Alice Springs and Ballydoyle. Then up towards the line. Turret rocks in fourth, but it's Minding. She took this by the scruff of the neck, and Aidan O'Brien looks like having a 1-2, maybe 3. So it somehow will lead the descent down towards Tattenham Corner. From in second races Australian Queen. Putting out Seventh Heaven. Up the inside goes Turret Rocks. Minding's white face amongst horses. A skiffle comes 4 wide. Minding just having to negotiate a passage. Caught on heels there at a crucial stage, and Minding's had no luck at all. Turning into the straight, is shuffled back to last. Out in front, her stable companion somehow making the best of her way home. Skiffle in second. In third place Architecture. Now out in the clear. Minding is being pulled out to try and deliver a challenge. Back in fifth place is Harley Queen. They fan out with 2 furlongs to travel in the Oaks. Architecture has struck for home. Minding, despite being shuffled for last, is coming with a challenge and moves through into second. On the right-hand side, Architecture and Frankie Dettori. Minding, the purple cap for Ryan Moore, moves through the lead. Minding hits the front in the Oaks. In second is Architecture, and Minding stamps her authority. Met trouble in running, but will follow up her 1,000 guineas success by winning the Oaks. Minding outclassed them. Architecture gallant in defeat. Minding makes her move with Queen's Trust and Swiss Range, and it's Minding who has now moved through the lead. And now she begins to exert her authority, and Minding is being pushed out towards the line and will notch her 6th Group 1 success in the Cador Nassau Stakes. Ribchester Minding moves out to challenge. Stormy Antarctic Mitcham Swagger over on the far side. Lightning Spear changes course. Minding, she moves to the front. Ribchester, then Ortard, Galileo Gold. Lightning Spear is staying on stoutly, but it's Minding who's moved to the lead in the QE2. Lightning Spear and Ribchester are trying to run her down, but it's Minding who still leads by over a length. Ribchester trying to close 7 Group 1s, and she's only 3.
Absolute class act. Minding, who dominated the filly scene in 2016. She won the 2nd classic, of course, the 1,000 guineas. The first classic a day before had gone the way of Galileo Gold, trained by Hugo Palmer, who's kindly on the line. Hugo, obviously against the backdrop of what's going on, how are things?
Well, yes, everything is against the backdrop of what's going on. I think for everyone up and down the country, it's a little bit Groundhog Day, isn't it?
Yeah.
Luckily for those of us who train racehorses, Groundhog Day does include getting out of bed, going out and looking after our horses and exercising them and bringing them back in and keeping their owners up to date with the progress we're making. But none of us are quite sure in which direction we're making progress, because we don't know when and what is going to start. Is it
a case of taking it day by day? Because, of course, today being Good Friday, you would have had runners, no doubt, on all-weather finals day, but a case of just taking each day as it comes until we find out a little more?
Yes, it has to be. I mean, the horses have to do enough to keep themselves safe and protected from injury. And, of course, a huge amount of a flat trainer's horses at this time of the year would be being prepared for debuts in July, August, September, October. We've got loads of 2-year-olds in every yard up and down the country that wouldn't. Some of them be trained all year and might not even run in 2020. So a lot of the business as usual goes on, but obviously horses that were being got ready for early targets have missed them. But they'll come round.
Absolutely right. Perhaps a nice way of distracting is looking back to the first classic of 2016. Your first classic, it was Galileo Gold winning the 2,000 guineas in your hometown there of Newmarket. Just in terms of the anticipation of the race, building up to it, the hype was all pointing the way of Air Force Blue on the day. But the night before the race, how were you feeling about sending Galileo Gold to the Guineas?
The night before the race, we had a whole load of friends for dinner, and I pulled out the best wine I could find and said to my friends, I tell you what, guys, let's celebrate having a runner in a classic, because we may well have anything to celebrate tomorrow evening. So we had a riotous celebration. I had to peel myself off the pillow for first loss on Saturday morning. So I don't really remember a lot of how I was feeling the night before. But it was a funny build-up to the race, because we were always, in my mind, all winter, we were going to go to France. And I remember him working on the Rowley Mile. Frankie rode him, and he worked really well at the Craven meeting. And I said to Frankie afterwards, I said, do you think he'd be competitive in the French Guineas? And he grabbed my arm and he said, why go to France? This will win any Guineas I've run.
Wow.
my knees knocked together. I nearly fell over. So that was when the nerves really got going. So the last 2 weeks is when it all got quite nervy. And I just sort of felt that there were slightly odd noises coming out of Coolmore. They were starting to say things like, Air Force Blue is so good, we're only going to run one in the Guineas. And none of us can. I mean, it was decades ago that Coolmore only had one horse in a classic, particularly the first one of the year. And then they did run 2 or 3, and he turned up in a tongue tie, and all of those sort of things began to suggest to me that his odds-on favouritism was pretty shaky. And I thought we had a chance of beating the rest.
You didn't have a great draw, and it was just interesting to hear what you said about Frankie Dettori urging you the way of Newmarket. How significant was the Frankie factor to get the horse into the right position, came down to the near side rail, because it was all about using that brilliant stride that he had, wasn't it?
He travelled brilliantly through the race. I remember standing watching it. If you watch the race, you imagine from side on, he disappears from view at a point at about sort of the bushes, the 3 furlongs out, only for a second, and then suddenly Frankie appears again, and Frankie's motionless, and everyone around him is beginning to nudge. And at that moment, I think people heard the Guineas described as an 8 furlong sprint. They do go hard in the Guineas, and he travelled so well through the race. And we had a lot of fun afterwards. Frankie sat on the arm of the sofa in the house and described to everyone every stride of the race, how basically he had it won from flagfall and everything he did. And he said I was aware there could be a horse coming up the rail, so I moved my hand, and the horse moved over a yard to block off the rail to make sure we were clear. And all of those things. Frankie doesn't win Group 1 after Group 1 after Group 1 by mistake. We all know that.
Absolutely right. He then went to Ireland and was beaten by Ortard, but we'll go to the St James's Palace, which was the clash of Ortard and your horse again, Galileo Gold, the Irish and English Guineas winner, and the spice of the French Guineas winner, the Gurkha from Ballydoyle. Just recollect this day and that ride from Dettori as well.
Well, I think lots of jockeys could have won on Galileo Gold on Guineas Day. Frankie grabbed the St James's Palace by the scruff of the neck. Frankie was a tiny bit despondent after Ireland, got boxed in, and the bottomless ground there and everything was just too much for him. But he, again, you say we didn't have a good draw in the Guineas. We were drawn widest of all in the St James's Palace as well. And I remember Ray Cochrane ringing me in the morning and said, just when you walk the course, don't forget what Willie Carson did on, who did he ride? Was it Dejo?
Right.
No. When Willie Carson came up under the trees in the QE2 30 years ago.
Bari.
Bari, there you are. And so I went down and walked the track because it was softish ground at Ascot. I went down and walked the track. And it didn't seem to me anything different. I remember ringing the clerk of the course, and he said, "No, we've actually we've put things into the grounds to make sure that the Willie Carson advantage no longer exists. So that plan went out the window, and I was so nervous. I was confident the horse was in every bit as good form as he'd ever been, and I thought we had the winning of it. But I could barely speak to Frankie beforehand. All I managed to say was, "Don't fall off, Frank," and he laughed as he went out. And that was it. That was about the only conversation he had beforehand.
He went to the Sussex Stakes. He was a valiant place behind the Gurkha, but I suppose they had a good theme, good battles between them. And when you reflect on the spring and the summer of 2016, as we see Galileo Gold with his ears flat back in battle, just how fond are the memories now, Hugo?
Yeah, the memories are wonderful, and I'm thoroughly looking forward to hopefully training some of his progeny next year. I mean, the funny thing is that the memories are great and the victories are wonderful, but I'm afraid I always rather dwell on the things that went wrong. I wish I hadn't taken him to France. He got terribly wound up on the aeroplane over there, and then never settled in the stables at Deauville, which is a very busy place for a horse. There's nowhere to chill out. There's always horses buzzing around. He walked his box all day, got very wound up, and was the same in the paddock beforehand. And he was never really the same horse again after going to France.
Right.
And I just, it was only 11 days after the Sussex Stakes where he'd only been narrowly beaten and the Gurkha wasn't going, and I've always kicked myself for saying, I should have just given him a break and waited for the QE2,
Yeah, there were some very special days nonetheless. Just to round off where we were after talking about 2016 and future, hopefully when racing does come back, Powerful Breeze, all well with her going forward?
Well, I'm presuming you're aware she has an injury.
Beg your pardon on that one.
But all is well. I mean, she's only, I say only. She's broken her ribs.
Right.
She got a fright from a speeding car, lost her rider, and then fell over and landed on the stirrup iron. And so she's broken some ribs, which are healing. It was 7 weeks ago yesterday, I think. So they are healing. But anyone who's ever broken ribs knows that it's a slow and painful process. And obviously for a horse, that's where we have to put the girth around. So, we will get her back. And people have joked to me, say, you might get to run in the Guineas anyway.
Yes.
I very, very firmly would much rather watch the Guineas go ahead as soon as possible without her, and then we can find some autumn targets for her.
Well, she looks very exciting nonetheless, and hopefully she's all fit and firing for when racing comes back. Hugo, thank you very much indeed for joining us and reflecting on 2016.
Pleasure, thanks.
That was one of the themes, Chris Dixon, of 2016. It was just interesting to hear Hugo Palmer's thoughts and how he said he kicked himself ultimately for going to France. But there were some super success days with the Guineas and Royal Ascot with Galileo Gold.
Yeah, there were, and as Hugo said there, I think Frankie Dettori was a big part of that Royal Ascot win. I mean, he gave him a fantastic ride that day, and he just had him in the perfect position, having got boxed in. I'm not sure whether getting boxed in made the absolute difference in Ireland the time before, to be honest. Ortard was probably just very much favoured by the soft ground. That seemed imperative for him. And he travelled very well down the outside. But for all that Galileo Gold was a horse that could sort of latch on to the bridle a little bit and almost looked like he was borderline keen in the early part of a race, he did always find an awful lot for pressure. It was a little bit of a surprise when you look at the manner of his victories that he never had a go over 10 furlongs. They didn't need to, I suppose, in the short term, and they're keeping him to the mile division where he did excel. But he ran like a horse so often that would get a little bit further, for all that there was quite a lot of speed in his pedigree. But that ride at Royal Ascot was a fabulous one. He just had him in the perfect spot, and having maybe felt like he was a little bit unfortunate in Ireland, having got boxed in towards the inside, a horse just hanging on to him. His ride on that occasion certainly made the difference. And then you move on to later on in the season when the Gurkha was beaten again, and it was a case of Ryan Moore learning on that occasion, because having sat a long way back at Royal Ascot on the Gurkha, he sat much handier, and it was Galileo Gold that went on and made the running that day, but he was always tracked by the Gurkha, who just picked him off, and ultimately I think there were two horses that were very closely matched in terms of ability.
Absolutely right. We've talked about a couple of the classics. We'll move on to the Derby, and it was won in the colours of the Aga Khan by the Dermot Weld trained Pat Smullen ridden Harzand, and there was real doubt going into this quite late on before the race that this horse would run at all, Chris, wasn't there? I think he'd spread a plate, his foot had to be iced. Obviously he was in the finest hands, Dermot Weld sending him over, beating a couple of Aidan O'Brien horses, US Army Ranger in Idaho, but it's still a fantastic story that the horse managed to win even after a bit of adversity before the race.
Yeah, you're right. He did. He spread a plate, didn't he, on the morning of the race, and I think they said that they had to ice his foot. But he ultimately came out and he got the better of US Army Ranger, who looked a looming presence, didn't he, when he came up towards Harzand. But Harzand, I think he won that Derby through superior stamina as much as anything else, Nick. The Derby is a race where you have to stay very well. There's no real hiding place in a Derby. And stamina does come to the fore. And I think ultimately he just had more of that particular attribute than US Army Ranger, who he beat. Then, of course, he went on to the Curragh and got the better of Idaho in an Irish Derby. I don't think either race was exceptionally strong in terms of form, but this was an impeccably bred horse that really relished going up in distance and was a strong stayer.
He was indeed. It's shots of unbelievably emotional and delighted Pat Smullen, of course, now retired. We send his best wishes to him, but what a fine day it was for all the team. Harzand winning the Derby. We'll move on to Postponed, who was one of the star older horses of the season, and this is when winning the Juddmonte International Stakes at York's Ebor meeting. How good was this fella, Chris?
He was a very good horse. Just looking back at those pictures of Pat Smullen and Dermot Weld, it was the first Derby for the pair of them, wasn't it, that year? Which probably part of the reason why there was so much emotion attached to it. Postponed was an exceptionally good horse. In this year in particular, I think, he was a horse that developed with age. He was a son of Debarwi that just got better as he matured, really. And I think the day that he won here in the Juddmonte International at York was up there with the best of his performances of that year. He'd won a couple of Group 1s prior to it, hadn't he? But this race perhaps had a little bit more depth to it, and he was just, despite coming back in trip, travelled through the race very strongly and was always holding them.
I think it was the highest rated race in the world that year, was the Juddmonte International. Also at that meeting, the Yorkshire Oaks. This is just to talk about Found and also the training performance of Aidan O'Brien, because the winner was Seventh Heaven, stablemate of Found, but it was a comeback for Found after her mid-season break she'd run at Royal Ascot. But for the back end of the season, this is the tribute to Aidan O'Brien. She was second in the Yorkshire Oaks, second in the Irish Champion, beats Highland Reel and Order of St George in the Arc, the stablemates. 13 days later, she ends up second in the Champion Stakes, and then she goes to the Breeders' Cup as well. She was brilliant, but she was tough, and she was trained by a man that ultimately has conquered just about everything.
Yeah, he had, and of course we saw Minding a little earlier on. Minding leading home a 1-2-3 in the Guineas that year for Aidan O'Brien as well.
Yeah.
On this occasion, I think Found was probably, you mentioned, had that mid-season break, and it was well documented at the time, wasn't it? That
yes.
Found was felt in need of the run going to the Yorkshire Oaks at that meeting, and Seventh Heaven, I think, ultimately, having not travelled as well into the race as Found did, responded really well to pressure. I'm not sure, did she never win again at the top level, Seventh Heaven? She won a Group 2 the following year, but she never really, that was, I suppose, that Yorkshire Oaks, her marquee performance, whereas Found went on to progress from it, particularly so at the back end of that season. Yeah,
that's shots of her winning the Arc. It was a 1-2-3 for Aidan O'Brien. We just got used to them. She didn't beat Almanzor, though, 13 days later in the Champion Stakes. Prior to that was, of course, the Irish Champion Stakes at Leopardstown. She was in that race. So too was Minding. Harzand was in there. It was a star-studded affair. Group 1 winners and multiple Group 1 winners everywhere you looked. But across the channel, over to Ireland, came Almanzor, the Prix de Jockey Club winner. I think Christophe Soumillon described him as one of the best horses he'd ever ridden, and he showed it this day, didn't he?
He did. This was an extremely talented horse. We only got to see him once as a 4-year-old, and then he was retired. I'm not quite sure what happened, but he was brilliant this day. He got the better of Found. The pair of them pulled clear of Minding, who's towards the inside there, and Almanzor, just the way that he picked up, quickened on, and then responded, and he was really the standout performer of the year. I think was postponed, and this victory and his subsequent victory at Ascot were the real top level, the top end of those performances that he produced.
Yeah, this is exactly the reason what they'd want on Champions Day. They've had the likes of Cyrus Tazegler and top level performers from France. So in 2016 for Almanzor, Jean-Claude Rouget to send Almanzor earlier over. He'd been to Ireland, he came to England. I mean, Found ultimately 13 days after the Arc. She's run an absolutely extraordinary race. But this was just a very, very good horse who, as you quite rightly said, it would have been lovely to have seen him kick on as a 4-year-old the next year and go for the Arc, but we were robbed of that chance.
Yeah, I think they said at the time that the following year's Arc would be the time for him, but as you say, we never got a chance to see that. But what we did see of him, we know that he was an exceptionally talented horse, and Christophe Soumillon has ridden some very good horses during the course of his career, and yet he was on record as saying he was one of the best, if not the best, that he'd ever ridden was Almanzor, and the rate of progress that he made, having been beaten in what was basically a trial for his return to action at Sean T. He was then unbeaten for the rest of that season. He progressed really, really sharply. He had a real strong finish to his races, and we never saw him over 1.5 miles. And it's not impossible to think, really, that if we had have seen him as a 4-year-old going for an Arc, that he might well have improved over that sort of distance, given the way that he saw his races out.
Let's talk about a couple of the other highlights that year, and also at Ascot, but at the Royal Meeting, the jaw-dropping wow moment, arguably of the year, would have been the performance of the 2-year-old Lady Aurelia, trained by Wesley Ward, who absolutely dismantled the Queen Mary field, Chris.
Yeah, by this stage we'd kind of become accustomed to the Wesley Ward 2-year-olds, hadn't we? But you couldn't really ever get accustomed to seeing performances like the one that Lady Aurelia produced on this day at Royal Ascot. She came back the following year, of course, and did it again, but not in such a wide margin victory. Just the way that she had every horse in an awful lot of trouble from a very early stage of the race. And David Fitzgerald said in his commentary, and now Frankie says go on the American, and she just booted clear.
Yeah. And
it must have been for the last quarter furlong or something that Frankie was in that position with his arm raised and finger pointing to the air.
It was. And also for the flat racing scene, we talk about, obviously, the horses while they're around and what they did, and none more so than Frankel, but it was the year in 2016 when we got to see his offspring, and the first of which appeared on the 13th of May. That was Kung Ko, and he followed in his old man's hoof prints by having a 1 next to the name straight away. There was quite a bit of anticipation and excitement. This was at Newbury. Of course, later in the year, the flagship early horse for Frankel, Cracksman, would appear, but it was just a flying start, wasn't it?
It was. I suspect that a few people had Frankel's ready to run and didn't want to be the first. Yeah. And eventually it was the John Gosden team that decided to unleash one, and Kunko came out and made a winning start for the stallion. But such was the mark that Frankel had left on the sport. It was always going to be much anticipated that when his stock hit the ground, and Kunko did go on and prove himself a group class performer the following season as a 3-year-old as well, when he won a Group 3 at Sandown. So he wasn't just a early season 2-year-old winner. He plied his trade at listed company thereafter. He hit the frame at the Royal Meeting, and he was a typical Franklin, what we've come to see really, in that he was a horse that found a lot off the bridle. Several of them do, and that was one of his attributes really that Kunko had.
That's Kunko coming back in at Newbury in May 2016. We're going to see him again actually in the next clip as we fast forward to October. This is the Zetland Stakes. one of the latest 2-year-old races, of course. And just in terms of some of the horses that came out of this race, the winner was Coronet, second was Kunko, third Permian, of course, who we saw so triumphantly next year at Royal Ascot. Fourth was a certain Wings of Eagles, who went on to win the Derby in extraordinary circumstances the next year. And even further down the field, who obviously didn't run to his best on the day, was Defoe. It wasn't a bad little race to go forward with, Chris.
It wasn't, certainly wasn't, and there were several quality horses in that field. It's not always a race that you assume is going to work out with quite as much depth as what it did on this occasion. But ultimately, the winner Coronet, she did it pretty comfortably, didn't she? She was well enough on top. For all that she didn't win by a long way, you always felt that she was winning, and it was a fairly cosy victory for her. But yeah, it was a very good race. Wings of Eagles obviously improved a lot the following year when he went up in distance in the Derby.
Yeah, just a bit. Now, in terms of bargain buys, you won't get one better, certainly that year, than Mrs. Danvers, who was 5 from 5 as a 2-year-old. She cost £1,000, and by the time she retired, she'd earned nearly 200,000. This is her winning the Super Sprint. She went on to win the St Hughes at Newbury, and also group class victory with success in the Cornwallis as well. But just in terms of a bargain basement buy, Chris, that was about as good as it gets.
It was, as you say, she went through the ring at £1,000. She was a vendor buyback, so it wasn't as if someone sold her for £1,000. So there wasn't anyone left kicking themselves. She went through the sales ring, and that was part of the reason that she was able to run in a super sprint off such a light weight. But she then, as you say, she went on and won a St Hughes Stakes. She won a Cornwallis Stakes in Group 3 company. She was very strong and compact, wasn't she, Mrs. Danvers? She was the daughter of Helvellyn, and she wasn't particularly big, but she was a very, very sharp 2-year-old. We only saw her twice later in her career. She never fully went on, but she was a very, very good 2-year-old, and as you say, a tough horse for a small stable like Jonathan Portman, who have gone on with similar types in subsequent years.
Well, just look at some of the colours she's beaten there. Cornwallis Stakes, Sheikh Hamdan Al Maktoum, Coolmore further behind with the Derek Smith colours in there. It is a rarity when you get a horse who ultimately doesn't capture such a price tag that can compete and certainly beat those kind of horses. So when we get taglines like that in racing, we're always going to jump on them, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was a great story for the year because she'd gone through the sales as a yearling at such cheap money when the vendors bought her back, and then the way that she progressed, and that it was for a small stable, and that she went on and I mean, she must have been extremely valuable by the time she'd retired as a listed in Group 3 winner. But it was one of the great stories of the year. Another
great story came in the final classic, and it was a success for Laura Mongan and our own George Baker. Harbour Law winning the St Leger at a big price. Of dramatic enough race with what happened to Idaho earlier on. But what a tremendous day that was, Chris.
It was, as you say, Idaho slipping and unseating added real drama to it, but George Baker, he pulled Harbour Law to the outside, didn't he? The horse was just edging in a little bit. You can see that it would have been a good story, to be honest, if the horse who finished in second had won, because that was a syndicate-owned horse, Midland Park's Ventura Storm and Silvestre de Souza. But Harbour Law, there's George with his Leger cap on, and for a small stable and a first classic winner for a rider that didn't get as many opportunities as perhaps his talent deserved in those races, just because he didn't have a job that allowed him to ride in those races time and again. It was a much deserved victory.
You've picked out as a handicap improver of the year the Millman trained Sir Roderick, who I think was winning at Haydock in April off 74. Get to mid-July and winning at Sandown off a mark of 90. Is this the horse that you were keeping on side that year, Chris?
I don't know if he I think I backed him at Windsor when he won one day. I think you find every year that Rod Millman has a handicapper that progresses right through the ranks, and he was probably that season the most progressive horse in terms of rating difference from start to finish in the handicap ranks. He started out with a win at Windsor off 67. He ended up winning off 90 and with a mark of 97. So he went £30 up the handicap during the course of that year. And as I say, he's from a stable that, without having masses and masses of ammunition, seemed to, time and again, year in, year out, find a horse of this kind of nature that progresses a lot from the 2-year-old campaign. It's often a 3-year-old. Sometimes they're a little bit older, but they just eke steady improvement out of them. And he was a horse that they were immensely proud of. He had a very, very good attitude, and obviously he got on really well with Freddie Talicki, who rode him. Well, pertinent to say, because obviously it was later that year, it was at the end of October that Freddie so sadly suffered life-changing injuries in that fall at Kempton, that horror fall. And of course earlier that season, in fact the last couple of months prior to that accident, he'd had his first 2 Group 1 wins in the Prix Jean Romanet and the Prix de l'Opera aboard Speedy Boarding, Chris. Yeah, he had. Speedy Boarding, he gave that a fabulous ride over in France, didn't he? And it was extremely sad what happened that night at Kempton. I'll never forget watching the racing from home that night. And, you know, there was... it was a horrible incident, but you just knew that it was nasty at the time. And I think for a long time people were fearing for Freddie's for his life. To be honest, it was life-changing injuries that he suffered. But it was just a horrible incident. As you say, it was just at a point of his career where he really was very much a young rider that was on the up. He'd been a really good apprentice with Richard Fahey, but he'd made a name for himself in the south of England by that point, and was getting some really good contacts, most notably James Fanshawe, and he had a massive career in the saddle ahead of him. Yeah, here on Freddie Talicki, of course. If I said to you the 2016 Silver Cambridgeshire at Newmarket, how does that resonate with you, Chris? Oh, that was some day. that was a tremendous day. That's the trophy actually in the. Is it behind me? It is, yeah. That was a fabulous afternoon. It was quite early on in us owning horses as the horse watchers, and spot the mistake there, by the way, Nick. Spot the mistake. But it was. I'll leave you to think on that one. I'll leave you to think on that. Okay. See if you can just. There's something wrong, but this was a brilliant day. And he'd been working very well. It was his first run for us. We managed to sneak in right down at the bottom of the handicap. We bought him and a horse called Hakam on the same day at Doncaster. There was only about 3 lots between them, and he was working really well, and we thought we might just sneak into this. Andrew Mullen would normally have ridden him, but he didn't think he was going to get in, and so he'd committed to a full book of rides, I think in Scotland that day, and was scratching around for a jockey, and Danny Brock ended up riding him. He was one of a few that could do the weight, didn't already have a ride in the race, and I don't think Danny had at the time ridden a winner for 2 or 3 months. And he came into the paddock, and Mick just said, "Just let him bowl along, don't worry, and he'll keep finding for you. He'll go close." Was it the cap? It was. Yeah. There we are. Brilliant. But it was a good day all round when Mythcow won the Silver Cambridgeshire. I think we're going to finish up with a couple of viewer requests which have come in via email. I'll say thank you to Chris in a moment or two's time. But first up, it's Quiet Reflection winning the Group 1 Sprint Cup at Haydock.
Moving down towards halfway, then Catchy in the orange sleeves just about has the lead. To Mechranissa under the rail. Dancing Star purple jacket swayed while Jane's Memory out on the right. Quiet Reflection is travelling 2 to everything else is 1 in behind at the moment, and now she finds daylight and begins to surge forward. Don Juan Triumphant is also running on. Furlong and a half to go in the Sprint Cup. Quiet Reflection shaken up. Comes to challenge Catchy Swadar. Only Mine, Mechranissa and Jane's Memory, and Quiet Reflection powers to the front inside the last furlong. The Tin Man is flying from the rear, cutting back the deficit, but Quiet Reflection is not for catching, and she draws away to win the Sprint Cup.
She was brilliant, Quiet Reflection, and a testament to the longevity of the Tin Man as well. Also that year at Newmarket, the Dewhurst was won by Churchill, who would go on to win the Guineas a few months later.
They're through the halfway point now in the Dewhurst. They've only got 2.5 furlongs to go. Lancaster Bomber is now being ridden along. South Seas is between rivals. On the outside, Thunder Snow. Churchill found himself in a pocket. Now he's angling towards the outside. With him is Blue Point. Rivet needs to do more, and so too Seven Heavens. They meet the rising ground, and Churchill has just got the lead. Blue Point tries to go with him. Back in third is Thunder Snow. They've got 100 yards to race. It's Churchill out in front, and it is a 5th win in the Dewhurst for Aidan O'Brien as Churchill takes the Dubai Dewhurst Stakes.
Churchill for the all-conquering Aidan O'Brien went on to scoop Classic Glory next year. Into the final few moments of the show. So, Chris, thank you very much indeed. What was the highlight of 2016? Silver Cambridgeshire aside, what else stood out for you?
I think it was probably in many ways the way that Almanzor went through the season and some of the performances that he produced, but I'll never ever forget that Lady Aurelia performance. She was spectacular that day, and just the manner of that victory was something that left a mark.
Absolutely. Chris, thank you very much indeed. Stay safe, enjoy the new office, and thank you very much at home for watching the Racing Years 2016. Next week we'll be moving on into the final few years, but we'll see you then.